All right, so let's go ahead and dive right in. Welcome to the Storytime with Uncle Tweezy podcast. I want to take you guys about as far back as I could possibly go without being a zygote. In this particular case, I have via Skype a homie from way back, and when I say way back, I'm talking junior high way back. None other than Mr. Greg Wickstrom. This rings no bells for anyone unless she went to Palm Harbor Middle School circa late 80s. But I affectionately known him as the Pigs, which we will explain where that comes from.
Deep roots there.
Deep roots. But basically, me and this guy go way back. And so whenever I'm asked, what was your first rap? Do you remember it? What was your first situation? This is where I have to go back to, but there's hard to give anybody a frame of reference because this is like 13, 14, 15. So I met this guy in junior high. It was Palm Harbor Middle School, and we used to share a desk, but not literally share a desk. He had it at a different time, and I would always draw and sketch. I came from an artistic background, and I would leave little sketches on the desk because I was inevitably always bored in classroom. And then I would find little touch-ups.
Alterations.
Some little alterations to my drawings, because apparently me and this guy shared. We both shared the same desk, but at different periods. Yeah. And so I would draw something, and then come find it the next day, it was completely altered. Extra anatomical parts were added.
Among other things,
some various speech bubbles would be coming out of my guy, we had a lot of mutual friends, but I don't think we had really kicked it until about 8th grade, and so our paths started crossing, and I think we started to bond on some very twisted artistic level.
Yeah, man.
But anyway, so that's how I got to know you, and then we went on to high school together at Tarpon Springs High School.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that's probably when we really connected. And I lived, I think, maybe a good 30 minutes away, bicycle ride. But every day after school, I'd hop off the bus, hop immediately on my bike, and brave the traffic, almost dying, and I would go immediately to this guy's house with dreams of world domination via rap music.
Yeah, man. Yeah, we had a turntable. And I had an older brother that always kept me a few years ahead on the music scene. And he had some old Black Sabbath records I think we used to spin.
Yes.
And a few turntables I think got scratched out.
So I got to really give it to you, Greg, because you were like the first guy to put me up on a lot of the hip hop that really ended up really shaping me from an influential standpoint.
Wow.
So up to that point, I think 8th grade, I was just into like Rob Bass and a lot of the party rap and, of course, previously Beastie Boys. Yeah. But I'll never forget, you were like, no, you got to check out Public Enemy.
Yeah.
And you put me up on a lot of the conscious rap that I was unaware of. And I would remember you'd make me some mixtapes or whatever. And I have to really honestly, cite you as the guy that I guess influenced my taste in rap.
Wow, that's pretty deep, man. It's was so different than anything that was out there at the time. You didn't hear Public Enemy on the radio,
right?
I think I just saw it on that small clip in the self-destruction thing that was on MTV.
Yeah.
And the second I heard Chuck D's voice, I just knew, and then the message was so deep. They were saying something. And if you look at the pop music in the 1980s, they weren't saying a whole lot.
Right. Absolutely. What drew you to that style of music?
It was just a whole other world that we weren't exposed to as kids growing up in the suburbs in the 80s. That just wasn't something that you saw. It was something we saw. The internet wasn't around. There was just very few ways to see what was happening outside of our very small world in those days. The mall, so it was definitely an awakening. And then just, especially with Public Enemy, all the things they had to say, it was so different, and it really made me think about a lot of things that I'd never thought about before. And most people around me weren't thinking about,
Right. I remember Chuck D saying that that hip hop was the ghetto CNN.
Yeah, that man, Chuck D, he was a messenger of prophecy, man. He, yeah, he's amazing lyricist,
Right.
and
Well, it's funny about that because, see, at the time, though, I was living in the suburbs, the Palm Harbor area of Florida, with my mom during the week, and then every weekend going to what was considered the hood portion of Tampa, Ybor City, with my dad.
yeah,
So I was always in this balancing act of these two worlds that I was living in, and kind of not really fitting into either in a lot of ways until maybe junior high, or should I say late junior high, freshman year of high school. And I always felt like an outsider when it came to hip hop. But you were like the one of the few guys that I bonded with on a rap level. That it was almost like a secret language that we had. You know what I'm saying? Like this, this language that we basically had of hip hop.
that's true.
So all that to be said, I always kind of felt like, ironically, that the two white guys in Spanish class were the only ones discussing Public Enemy.
Yeah, that's true. I think it's difficult for people to understand that rap wasn't popular music. I mean, kids that had grown up later, it was not popular. We kind of dug it out and literally dug it.
Yeah.
And just was fascination with the culture.
Right.
Right. Yeah. I had to get that African necklace. Remember?
Okay. So let's go ahead and sidebar into that right now. Let's talk about that because that is a phenomenal story. So the late '80s rap was very Afrocentric, and so a lot of the rappers were rocking these African medallions, and it was like almost like the ultimate. I don't know. I guess you could say the ultimate
apparel.
Yeah, it was the ultimate apparel. But as a white guy, and by the way, we've just now been joined by none other than the infamous Chris McConey is now on the line with us.
Oh man, this is like the first G-Force Posse reunion.
What's happening?
No, what's up, Chris?
So we'll explain how Chris is significant to this conversation in 1 second. But basically, I was talking about Greg's foray into his Afrocentric roots via Tarpon Springs High School. So let me basically explain. So a lot of the time, a lot of the rappers would rock these African medallions. Obviously, it was a black thing, and rap was a very black, militant aspect at that time. So it was the ultimate non-white guy thing to have. However, I'll never forget this. At lunchtime, Greg gets enough chutzpah together, enough gall, if you will, to walk up to a random black kid at our school and offer him money on the spot.
Quante Fowler.
For his African medallion.
Dude, that thing, people don't understand. You couldn't go to the mall and get this medallion. There was no store that you could find this thing in. And, when you respect an artist, you want to look like them, you want to talk and sound like them. Public Enemy, they had these medallions. I'm like, and I couldn't get one. And here it is. I see this medallion. I'm like, yo, I'm going for it. And I bought it,
He bought it on the spot. And so for one part of me, I was like, well, he's just going to hold it. He's going to hang it up in his room. He'll know the line. Greg immediately puts this around his neck and just posts up on the wall like, yeah, that's right. That's right. Just another light-skinned African over here.
Hey man, one world, one human.
There you go, Bob Marley. Good job.
Yeah, man.
So the funny thing was, I remember going to Ybor City on the weekends with my dad and seeing those hanging in like the little hood shops, and my dad actually offering to buy one for me, and I just felt like that was the line that I just couldn't cross, so to speak. And long story short, I had always admired Greg's ability to just essentially just say, I don't care what anybody thinks. I'm just going to do this XYZ. Which brings me to another man who has hopped on the conversation with us, Mr. Chris McConey, another Palm Harbor Middle School graduate / Tarpon Springs alumni. I wanted him on the phone here because Chris is the person who recorded our first rap ever. So I thought it would be hilarious to recreate this moment because obviously it's very significant to my career and my life. And I'm going to tell it from my perspective. Greg, maybe you can tell it from your perspective, and I would definitely like to hear it from Chris's perspective. But I remember at the time, you know, we were basically, we had a fake rap group that was called the go ahead.
G-Force Posse.
Which obviously the G stood for Greg, because Greg was at the forefront of the rap thing here. So we made up this, if I'm not, and correct me if I'm telling the story wrong, but we made up basically this fake rap group that was in sort of retaliation for another classmate who had a rap tape, and we thought that he was not real like we were.
How could I forget?
And his name was, should we just go ahead and put it out there? I guess I'm assuming he's not going to listen to the podcast.
Yeah, I think it's safe. Curly.
His name was Curly. That was his rap name. And we just figured he was not the authentic rappers that we were, which I don't even know because we had never recorded or done anything at that point.
But he put out a tape, man.
He put out a tape.
And we were like, what's this? This is some bogus stuff, man.
This is bogus. It was boffing, if you will.
Well, he was playing like a cut from, I can't remember what the group was, and he was just talking over it, basically.
Right.
But then passing himself off like some MC.
Right. And so we basically made up this rap group sort of to retaliate against him. Mm-hmm. However, we never actually recorded anything or did anything. And I do remember very clearly coming up with the G-Force Posse with the idea that we were going to charge people to be in the rap group. Do you remember this?
That was true. I made cards.
Do you want to go ahead and, you want to talk about these G-Force Posse membership cards, which I will be putting, this will be the only image on this podcast, is this Posse card.
Yeah, my dad and I cooked this thing up in his office. He had one of those original Mac computers, you know, the ones, you know, from like, you know, the mid-'80s. And he put that together. I think the first Fishbone album used the same program, if that means anything to anybody. But yeah, we put together these cards and we laminated them and cut them up. And then if they wanted to be in the posse, we wrote their special names on them, which we crafted based on their characteristics or nicknames that we came up with. And yeah, man.
Can you preface this by the fact we did also charge people to be in this?
Yeah, it's usually lunch money.
I mean, that's quite a hustle if you think about it. That's you have to pay to be in the group, $5, and you get a fake name.
I'm pretty sure these were not the most politically correct names that
They may have
either.
Yeah, they may have bridged, you know, crossed a few. Yeah, perhaps, but it was, you know, different time.
I do remember a lot of Jewish related names for our fellow Jewish friends. I do remember a one known as Kid Bagel.
That
could be. And anyway,
self-proclaimed, I think that one was.
There you go. So the point was we were charging people to be in these rap groups, and so I remember there eventually was a sort of a backlash of, you don't have no rap group, you don't have no CD, et cetera, and Greg cooked up a plot.
I did.
Explain your way of us having fake legitimacy.
I had a good friend that worked at the record store, CD store in those days, and he would always hook me up with the demo discs for free and that sort of thing. And I told him all about our group and how we were getting started up and how people were questioning, you know, the legitimacy of the group. So he printed out a nice little label for me, and he stuck it in the hip-hop section, which back then was called the rap section, I'm sure. And sure enough, it said G-Force Posse. And so I don't know what we'd be sandwiched in between the G's and the H's.
The best part of this was it always appeared like it was sold out.
Yeah, a lot of people come up and be like, no, it's for real, man. It's a Camelot. I saw it myself.
It's a Camelot.
It's sold out, man. Can't keep it on the shelf.
We could not keep it on the shelves because it did not exist in any format. So this was like the perfect out to basically be like, yo, I got no CD. Yes, we do. It's in the stores. It's just always sold out because we were in such a demand in the Palm Harbor, Clearwater, Dunedin area.
But dude, back in '89, I mean, if you had a CD, it meant you were like for real. What you couldn't burn your own disc in these days. That's just for people that don't understand that.
Right. Well, so I think eventually, as the school year progressed, I think I remember some sort of discussion being like, well, maybe we should actually record something and finally do something. And and that basically led to you and I sort of staring blankly at each other going, I don't have any beats. You don't have any beats.
Yo,
We
my
don't.
friend's got a bass guitar. Maybe that makes some bass. Remember that?
I just remember you were on a quest for bass. You
That's
were
right.
constantly like going, well, I don't know how to make a beat. Well, it has to have bass.
How are we gonna get that sound?
And you were like,
that
I was
hello
like,
Brooklyn sound.
right. And it was to the effect of basically going, well, we have no clue what to do right now. And so I thought, oh, they must take 2 records and just scratch the break beat. And we only had 1 record player. So I remember very distinctly going to a friend's, Jonathan Crane's house, to attempt to scratch the beat and completely destroying his 1 record player.
Yeah, you got about 2 scratches in, and that thing was
Gone.
that was done.
And that childhood local neighborhood friend had to drive or ride his bike 20 miles to replace it.
I'm pretty sure if his parents had found out about that, that would have been destruction.
However, unfortunately, he became sort of the I don't know, the go-to. I don't want to say whipping boy. That's a terrible term, but he definitely was the wrath of several of our attempts at everything.
Yeah.
I do remember, unfortunately, he being the guinea pig for a lot of bad ideas that we would execute on him. So, shout out to John. I apologize. 25 years later, I still feel guilty about destroying your record player. But anyway, I remember this brought us to a point where we were like, look, I don't have any beats. You don't have any beats. We really don't know how to make any beats. Then comes Chris McConey, 2 blocks over, who I knew was a third bass fan, and thus I felt a kinship with.
Pete Nice.
And I don't remember, Chris, did we have classes in junior high together?
I'm sure we did.
I definitely remember you being around. I don't remember as much of us hanging out as much as maybe getting into freshman year, but I think we go all the way back to like Ozona Elementary, maybe even.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. So I knew Chris. I didn't hang out with Chris as much as I did with Greg, but kind of the whole neighborhood sort of eventually would kind of kick it with each other. I think was that area that I would ride my bike down to, and so I remember basically Greg going, "Well, Chris has got recording equipment. Let's just go bang on his window."
I don't know if we banged on the window, but
I remember distinctly banging on his window. We did not go to his door.
Enter through the window. I think you actually entered through the front door.
We did enter through the front door, but I remember there was like going, we're not going.
Greg used to bang on my window all the time.
Okay.
I think he actually used to come in through the window.
all together.
He had an unhealthy obsession with my guitars.
Now that is true. Yeah, that's true. I remember that. You loaned me one. It was one of the first ones I ever played, if I remember.
Yeah.
So, Chris, do you remember this? Do you remember this moment when we came and essentially disrupted your piece? Do you remember this?
For sure. For sure.
Okay, so I'm curious to know what was going through your mind at that moment.
Well, so I was just excited. So I was like, basically a closet producer. So I would, I had my synth rig that, I could sequence stuff on, and I had my 4-track cassette recorder that I could lay down tracks on, and so I think I was just excited to have some people to collaborate with.
So you didn't feel put out by 2 random people from the neighborhood just being like...
I was used to Greg coming over and using me for my gear. So that was all pretty much par for the course, and then, hey,
So you just sort of penciled in Greg time about every day around 5.
Yeah, pretty much. Sounds about right.
Okay, so I remember going, okay, well, he's got I don't remember if you had, I think you had the third base CD or the third base poster.
No, I had the CD.
That was enough to me be like, okay, he's all right. He's legitimate. This might work. And I do remember, we must have prepared something. Now, I do remember one thing.
I don't know if I had some tracks that I'd been already working on, or if we just started in on it. And started just like, I think we did like, 3 or 4 songs?
All I remember is the one where my voice would not stop cracking constantly. That's what I remember the clearest. And I do remember us kind of walking in your room and sort of barging in and being like, all right, make us a beat. And you just like got on your keyboard, and all there really was a kick and a snare. And you were playing it live while we were attempting to do this rap. And
I think we laid down we would come up with the beat. Yeah. And then we would loop it, and then we would dump that to the 4-track, and then we would take that, and then you guys would rap over it.
All I can remember very clearly is how I had no control over my larynx. That the sheer amount, like I was definitely going through the change, and my voice would not stop cracking. And I remember very clearly on one line, I don't know why this sticks out in my head, and I said, hasn't settled down with a house and a wife, and instead of saying a wife, it was like, wife!
One of your first rhymes ever, huh?
The thing was, actually at the time, I remember kind of clearly going like, I don't want to be the rapper. I felt like I was like, not supposed to be a rapper. Like I was supposed to be the DJ. That it was supposed to be
that's what I remember. I remember.
MC Pigs and DJ Bones. Now, I have not even told people about my original first name, Bones, which I have to think, now that looking back, I think you actually gave me that name, Greg. I think you were the crafter of the Bones.
Perhaps.
Only because Jonah rhymed with Bona, which and I refuse to be known as Jonah Bona. And I remember very insistently saying, you have to call me Bones from here on out.
Yeah.
And here we are all these years later, and I still probably text you as Bones.
Yeah. Sounds tough, man.
It does. Yeah. However, MC Pigs has, I don't know if it has the same ring to it. So can you explain why in the world your name was Pigs?
You know, there's got to be like 10 different names that evolved. You know, I think, man, remember my friend had a BMX bike that said like Freestyler. And then that went to like Styler. And then like Sty, and then like Pigsty, and then it was just Pigs. I mean, that's pretty much what it was.
And I do remember, like, pretty much amongst our crew, nobody really used their actual name. Like, Chris McConey was not, hey, Chris McConey. It was like McCones or McConers.
I think it was McCones. I never really got a full-fledged nickname. It was always some modification of my last name.
The McCones. And I remember that conversation starting off with, like, well, we can always go to McCones. And so I was like, all right, so let's go harass him. And I remember, so I remember, this is where I think the story gets pretty funny, because I remember going to your house. And now, full disclosure, at this time, I was not a believer. I was actually pretty, I guess for lack of a better term, I was almost agnostic. I didn't know if there was a God or not. I was definitely in an angry space. And in a lot of ways, I was, just basically like, I don't know, I guess, I'm not sure what the word would be, but just definitely struggling with my identity. And long story short, I remember using so much profanity on our recording that Chris's mom intervened.
I definitely remember your mom coming in a couple of times.
Yeah,
the lyrical content.
There was a point that we took a break, and we stepped out, and we were like 13 years old, or I'm 13, probably 13.
No, actually, we would have been 14. I think we've been in like this freshman year. You're right.
Yeah, so 13, 14. This is a pretty pivotal time in a kid's life. There's a lot of awkwardness, and so we come out of the room, and of course my mom, just starts laying in with, hey, well, why aren't you guys being more positive? Why don't you make something that's about God? And so that was maybe a little embarrassing. We got the new kid over. I'm trying to make a good first impression. Greg, I'm pretty sure, Greg, you heard this like nonstop from her.
Yeah, but, on the way to Busch Gardens a few times, probably.
Yeah. So I was like, oh, come on, really.
And I remember hearing that, and I'll never forget it, because it's so ironic, and we'll talk about how that relates to you, Chris, now. But I remember her saying that, and I do remember kind of like constantly getting in trouble with various parents over my mouth. I remember your mom, Greg, one time like saying, your friend's language is atrocious.
That sounds like my mom. Still, to my mom, the F word is fart. I mean, it sounds dirty for me to even say it, because I would never say that word in front of my mother.
Well, I must have used enough choice language that I do remember your mom, Chris, kind of saying like that, like, hey, you guys should be positive, and you guys should even rap about God, and God was the furthest thing from my mind at that point in 1989. And I remember kind of sitting there, maybe politely, sort of like, oh, okay, yeah, sure. And I remember we had kind of tried to write a positive song, like that rap that I had just done where my voice kept cracking, like that was our positive song, which who even knows what we were trying to be positive about? Like, how much does a 14-year-old have to be positive? Like, go to school, get good grades, don't do drugs, kids. Anyway,
like a Fresh Prince song.
Yeah, basically, and so I'm coming from like, and it's ironic that we're talking about this, but I'm coming from NWA straight out of Compton, always in my headphones to this. But anyway, I remember us, we got done and we left, and I remember like turning to Greg and being like, Greg just like super irritatedly like, how's she gonna tell us to do what we're supposed to rap about? And I'm like, yeah, and I'm sure I let loose a flurry of expletives directed toward your mother, and I just have to apologize in 2015 for the harsh words I said walking down the street, walking away from our first recording session.
Perhaps a bit harsh.
That was a little harsh. There's no filter when you're 14, however.
No.
So I remember, so we recorded this. There was only literally one tape in existence.
Yeah.
I don't think we
Does
did.
that tape exist?
I don't know.
It got wiped, I'm pretty sure.
It probably got a Fishbone song written over it.
Yeah, maybe it's for the better. We can remember how, grand we thought it was.
I just remember getting a copy and being like, I have no control over my vocal cords. But anyway, so this is kind of where my story kind of takes a little bit of a turn. So that was my freshman year of high school. And so what was going on in my life at the time was obviously, struggling with identity. And that was kind of like the first year where I started to really feel like I was fitting in and connecting. And so I remember many parties that me and Greg, as young freshmen, were quite inebriated at. And I do remember it was really kind of a downward spiral for my life. And what had happened at the end of that freshman year is I ended up moving.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember going like, dang, like this everything that I had finally wanted, I got. And now I had to leave it all behind. Like, to me, to move 2 hours away, I might as well have moved to Alaska.
Yeah, I didn't see you for how many years?
It was years and years.
I know. We had the posse shirt, posse pants. I had to put that stuff in the closet, man.
So here's the irony was that I do remember I moved away. I did not see these guys anymore. Obviously, this is sort of pre-internet, so it wasn't like I could just text them or hit them up on Facebook. And as when I had moved is when I came to Christ, and I remember very distinctly like all my old raps, throwing them away. Kind of giving up on the whole thing, and it was kind of like with that move was almost like a moving of the changing of my life. But then, finding my way back to hip hop years later, which I'm going to save that story for another podcast with some other people. But just to tie this up a little bit, years later, I connected with. I remember graduating and then finding somehow I must have found you after graduating, because I remember we connected, Greg, a few times, right?
Yeah, it's like 94. He came over and I had the big drum set hooked up.
Yes.
That was fun, man.
I remember coming back to that area because that's where my grandma lived. I said, yeah, I'm gonna look up Greg and see what he's up to. And sure enough, like you were really into music. I definitely lost touch with you, Chris. But yeah, and so it was kind of cool. And so I think we just sort of off and on stayed in touch over the years. Obviously, with the advent of social media, it became super easier to find people. And I remember, Chris, didn't you hit me up on Facebook randomly?
No, actually, I think I got a request from you, and it said KJ5 Tweezy, and of course I had no idea who that was.
Who is this guy?
Yeah, like what? This is spam. This is Facebook. And so, but I did a little investigating, and I saw that you were also connected to Brian Hoke, who is also a Middle Tarpon Springs alumni.
Yes.
And so I hit him up and was like, who is this guy? And he's like, oh yeah, you remember Jonah from middle school and high school. It's like, oh, yeah. So that's how we reconnected. Then I accepted your friend request at that point.
I appreciate that.
Yeah.
And I remember you basically saying that you had gone out and either got my CDs, and at this point it's years and years later. I was already like well into my career, and I remember you saying something like you had been playing them with your kids.
Yeah.
Some
So
stuff.
I started checking into it, and you know, my kids love you now. Yeah.
Well, here's where it gets even weirder. So we reconnect, me and Chris do, and we get to talking. And I guess at the time I didn't really necessarily remember you as being like a church going guy, or maybe we just didn't really have enough connection to build on that level. But you had kind of said how, you know, you had met your wife and she was, you know, you guys had basically like started going back to church or something to that effect, and that you know, God had sort of been working in your life. And then how, just talking about the music, long story short, I'm out in Seattle all the time where you live. We reconnect. I end up rocking an event at your church, and just to bring the whole thing full circle, you end up being like one of the contributors to helping me put out my last record, Mental.
Yeah.
I mean, isn't that the weirdest thing you've ever heard of in your life?
Yeah, pretty much. Pretty cool.
That the one guy that recorded my first rap 20 plus years later would be the one guy to invest in my music.
It's a long-term investment right there.
That's, and I still never, I never paid you for the first session.
Pro bono.
It's the slow con.
But even to bring the whole thing even more full circle, with you, Greg, would be you know, a year and a half ago, where we did the Guinness World Record attempt for the longest freestyle.
That was great, yeah.
And so why don't you just tell real quick what you ended up doing, or what you do now?
Well, I always been driven by music, no matter what it was. You know, one of my biggest heroes, Duke Ellington, always said there's two types of music, good and bad. And I believe that music really comes down to the intentions of the artist, you know, as much as it does the skill level, you know. And I became a music teacher after I went to University of South Florida for jazz studies. And I still continue to play the bass, the double bass, with a few jazz groups. I'm actually going to be playing at the Clearwater Jazz Holiday this October 15th.
Boom.
Yeah, it's been a big gig we've wanted to have for a while, so that's happening this year.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it's a great venue right there in Coachman Park, the Clearwater Jazz Holiday. So yeah, I'm going to be doing that with Gloria West. She's a great little singer over here from Dunedin.
So I remember as I got ready to do that attempt with the four other rappers that we were going to do it with. So one of the conditions that we kind of came up with was we would do 1 hour as a team, and then every MC would do 1 hour by themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was the way that we knew we could pull off the Guinness attempt of 13 hours. And I felt like how I wanted to approach my hour by myself was to surround myself with people that were significant to my life, you know, either my music or my, you know, my life period. And obviously at that point, you and I had been in contact quite a bit, quite often. And I said, hey, Greg, it would be crazy if you would come and play live upright bass during my freestyle attempt.
Yeah.
And this fool shows up in a full suit and tie, looking straight out of a ska band, which I thought was quite classy. And if you ever, anybody that's listening to this, if you ever get a chance to go look up my solo hour, you'll see this little ginger-looking guy off to the slight right, right, left, right, just killing it on the upright bass. And I just thought that was really dope for me to full circle that. You know what I'm saying? Like, I don't know if we really had as big rap aspirations as we did, but just to know that your childhood homies can be a part of your future years later, either in your case, Chris, you know, helping me with putting out the record, or in your case, Greg, you know, helping me, you know, get into the Guinness World Record.
Yeah, man.
And that which still stands to this day. Thank you very much. Anyway. So I guess, and this is just going to be very self-indulgent and kind of awkward because I'm going to put you both on the spot, but I was always curious what went through your mind when you heard that either A, I was doing hip-hop music, or B, you know, was now this born-again Christian on, you know, a completely different angle than I used to be. You know what I'm saying? So Anyone that feels like stroking my ego, go. I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding.
Man,
but I was always curious about your guys' perspective on that.
Well, for me, it was a complete surreal experience, you know. I mean, something that we loved to do together when we were 13-year-old kids. You know, here's my best bud, continued to carry that torch all the way to the big time. And I can't tell you how many people I've told about, you know, how proud I am of you and how I know you. And when you came to my school that time, a couple of the girls in my class knew who you were and couldn't believe that, you know, we were down, so to speak. And, you know, it was just such an honor that, you know, he wanted me to be a part of the world record thing. And, you know, plus I helped you cut that one track. And
that's right. Yep.
It's just, you know, surreal is the word, man. It's just like, it's one of those things when you grow up, you know, some things are going to happen that you just would never imagine could possibly happen.
Yeah.
You know? And it's how it feels, man. It's like, it's beyond real, like superhuman.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah. I it's crazy to think that, you know, we were in my bedroom making that song or those songs. And then, you know, next thing you know, you fast forward, whatever, 10 years, 15 years, however long it was. And then you're out doing what you're doing. It's pretty shocking. And so, yeah, I mean, I think like Greg said, I think it's pretty surreal and it's really cool.
Yeah.
And then to be able to, you know, continue to connect with you and, you know, come alongside you and help you wherever I can and doing what you're doing has been a real blessing to our family. I think that, you know, the whole thing with my mom was pretty crazy too. And to think that, you know, maybe subconsciously had some sort of impact. I'm sure that makes her feel good.
Yeah.
You never know what you're going to say or what action you're going to take and what that's going to do in somebody's life. And
sure.
I think about that with my kids when they've got friends over and, you know, the random interchanges you have with them and sort of, you know, not knowing what that's going to do down the road. And, you know, every little conversation matters. Every little thing you say matters.
Absolutely.
So that's pretty cool too.
Absolutely. Well, I appreciate you guys taking out your time. Now, I want to go ahead and stroke your guys' egos real quickly. One, because I think Greg is going to be humble about his musical accomplishments. But if they want to check out your group or you know, where you guys play, if you're anywhere in the Southwest, I should say the Western Tampa area, where could they check out your band? Your multiple bands. You're in like 700 bands, bro.
I think it's down to 4 right now. But, yeah, I play a jazz duo with one of the best jazz guitarists, Nate Najjar, N-A-J-A-R, Nate Najjar. He plays all over the East Coast. He's got records. And, yeah, we play a duo at the Anata Wine Bar every third Monday. And I coordinate all the entertainment for the Anata Wine Bar, by the way. It's a really, really amazing spot. If anybody knows what Mazzaro's is, it's in the Mazzaro's family, downtown St. Pete. Anyway, so that's there. I also play with a ska band called the New Rulers, and we're playing all over the place, going to Sanford, Orlando this Saturday.
Is there a website they can check you guys out on?
Yeah, the New Rulers, I'm sure it's just like thenewrulers.com or something. I don't have anything to do with those websites. I just play the music.
Classic.
Yeah.
But yeah, Greg is a super accomplished musician, and I never forget coming by his class. He's also a full-time school teacher at a magnet school. Is that right?
It's
a charter school. That's right. My bad. And just and seeing his rapport with his kids was just it was just really dope to see. It's kind of funny how much we tortured our teachers, and now we are the teachers.
Oh yeah.
And but anyway, Chris, on the other hand, is basically a software mogul. He's the next Bill Gates / Steve Jobs. Maybe not, but anyway, he's up there in Seattle in the tech world, which that's cool. However, randomly one time, as me and Chris walked to the Dove Awards together, he goes, "Hey man, check out these pants," and he points at his pants. I said, "You want me to look? You want me to look at your pants?" Okay. He's like, "What do you think about these pants here?" I'm like, "It's a cool pants. I don't really get where you're going with this." He says, "Oh, I make jeans on the side."
on the side.
I'm like, excuse me? He's like, yeah, I make stretchy jeans. And I'm thinking, you make jorts. He's like, no, I sell jeans on the side. I'm like, you're like a massive tech software guy, and yet you also have a side business?
Yeah, dude. Yo, Chris, 34, man, so you know.
34.
So basically, Chris tells me just offhand. It would be like, oh, and by the way, I have my own car company, or like, oh, by the way, I have a rocket ship to the moon right now. Just casually, basically starts telling me about his jean company called Broke. Is that right?
Yeah, it's Broke. It's BROEK.
Right. He basically had a jean company on the side that was quite successful, and basically made these like phenomenal. I don't know. Go ahead and explain what these pants were, because I wear them all the time.
They're amazing pants. They're just amazing, and I can't take credit for the pants. I've got another friend from my earlier childhood that is a designer, and he had made these pants, just sort of as this side thing that he was working on, and every time we would get together, I would harass him about, how do we get these pants made so that, there's more than just, 3 or 4 pairs of them in existence. And finally, we both ended up down in LA at the same time. And, I asked about the pants, and he said they were basically on mothballs. And, I was like, that's unacceptable. And, and so we started thinking, and Kickstarter came to my mind, and at that point Kickstarter was mostly for sort of hardware kind of stuff or software kind of stuff, and but I was like, hey, Kickstarter might be a way for us to do this, and so we went on Kickstarter, and it was at the time the largest men's fashion Kickstarter was sort of in funding, and they had raised about $150K. And ultimately, I think they closed at about $250,000, and so we were like, this could really be. So why don't you come up to Seattle? We'll put together a video and a site and put it up there and see what happens. And so he came up to Seattle. We put everything together and launched it, and we sold about $80,000 worth of these pants, which then began the greatest learning experience of our lives, I think, as we went from how do we take these prototypes to production and deliver deliver hundreds and hundreds of pants around the world. But they're really amazing. We've got an e-commerce website up. It's Go for Broke, which is GOFORBROEK.com.
Yep.
And right now there's still some pairs in inventory, but mostly we're sold out. We're getting ready to launch a limited edition fall line that should hit the website in the coming weeks. So
yes, sir.
So super excited about that.
The moral of the story is, if you ever want to make a rap group, you will become a jeans mogul / phenomenal upright bass player / Christian rapper. There's something in the water in Palm Harbor, Florida.
Do not underestimate what can happen in a bedroom.
The pH, man.
pH. Well, thank you guys, man. I super appreciate it. Thanks for taking your time out. As usual, it's great to stroll down the memory lane. And for those that ever wanted to know what KJ's first rap was, it was a very bad experience vocally, larynx-wise. But humble beginning. So anyway, thank you guys. Appreciate y'all.
Yeah, you got it, man.
God bless.
Anytime.
All right.
Anytime.
See you, Chris.